In a world full of chaos, sometimes the most powerful healing doesn't come from long teachings, but from a simple story. Today's video brings you 10 short, yet deeply meaningful Buddhist stories, each one a quiet lantern, offering wisdom and compassion to help you release anxiety and return to stillness. Take a breath, slow down, and let these timeless stories guide you back to peace within. Welcome to Mindful Healing, a channel where we reflect on the deep truths of life, mindfulness, and philosophy. Story 1: The Empty Boat. There was once a man who deeply loved nature. Every evening he would row his small boat along a peaceful river where the golden light of sunset shimmered on the water and the wind whispered softly through the reeds. These quiet moments were when he felt most at peace, as if his soul was floating gently with the current of life. One afternoon, just as the last rays of sunlight fell upon the river, he set out again on his usual journey. He closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and let stillness fill his chest. But suddenly, from the distance he heard a rush of water. Another boat was heading straight toward him. At first he called out calmly, "Be careful. Please steer aside." But the boat kept coming. Closer. No response. He began to get annoyed, raising his voice. "What are you doing? You're going to crash into me." Still no answer. And then bang, the two boats collided. Anger surged through him as he stood up ready to lash out. But when he looked closely, the boat was empty. There was no one inside. It was simply drifting, carried by the current. In that moment, his anger melted away. He sat back down and let out a quiet laugh at himself. All that rage, for nothing, for a boat with no one steering it. The image of the empty boat is a powerful metaphor in Buddhist thought. In life, we often collide with people. A careless comment, a cold gesture, a sudden rejection, and our minds, quick to judge, instantly assume they did this to hurt me. So we react. We get angry. We take it personally. But what if their boat was also empty? What if their words or actions weren't really about us, but were simply the result of their own pain, confusion, or unconscious drift through life? When we let go of our ego, that voice that says, "This happened to me," we also let go of the need to be offended, to blame, or to control. We begin to see things as they truly are, neutral events drifting through the river of life. And in that realization, we find peace. Story 2: The Mustard Seed and Death. Long ago, there lived a young woman named Kisa Gotami. She was gentle, compassionate, and devoted to her family. Her greatest joy in life was her little son, a child she loved more than anything in the world. But then tragedy struck. A sudden illness took the life of her only child. Kisa's world collapsed. She couldn't accept the truth. She refused to believe he was truly gone. In her desperation, she carried her child's lifeless body through the village, knocking on door after door, pleading, "Please, someone help me. My child has died. Is there any medicine? Any cure that can bring him back?" People looked at her with pity. Some cried for her. Others turned away in silence. But the answer was always the same: "We're sorry, but there is nothing we can do." With each rejection, her grief deepened. But she wouldn't give up. One kind villager, seeing her desperation, told her, "Go see the Buddha. If anyone can help you, it's him." With a fragile flicker of hope, Kisa Gotami found her way to the Buddha. She fell to her knees, placed the child's body before him, and begged, "Please, Master, please bring my son back. I can't live without him." The Buddha looked at her with deep compassion. He didn't dismiss her pain, but instead of offering a miracle, he gave her a task. "I will help you," he said softly, "if you can bring me one mustard seed, but it must come from a home that has never experienced death." Kisa's eyes lit up. A mustard seed. That seemed simple. She quickly stood up and began her search. She knocked on the first door and asked, "Please, can you give me a mustard seed? But only if no one in your house has ever died." The woman at the door replied sadly, "My husband died last year." Kisa thanked her and moved on. At the next house, the answer was, "We lost our mother many years ago." And at the next, "My child passed away just this spring." House after house, Kisa searched, and house after house, she heard the same thing: death had visited them all. As the sun began to set, something shifted in her. With each step, she came to see that death was not her private tragedy. It was part of life, a truth shared by every home, every heart. She returned to the Buddha empty-handed, but no longer lost in desperate hope. She knelt before him and said quietly, "Master, I couldn't find a single house untouched by death. I understand now. Death comes to everyone." The Buddha nodded. "You have seen the truth. Grief is not yours alone to bear." When we recognize that impermanence is the nature of life, we begin to let go not of love, but of the illusion of forever. Kisa Gotami's sorrow is a sorrow many of us know, the heartbreak of losing someone we love so deeply that we feel we might not survive it. In grief, we often retreat inward and ask, "Why me? Why did this happen? How do I go on?" But when we lift our eyes and look around, we see something profound. Everyone has loved. Everyone has lost. We are not alone. That realization doesn't take the pain away, but it softens it. It gives it space to breathe. And from that space comes healing. To let go doesn't mean to forget. To let go means to stop resisting the truth. It means to hold our love gently, and when the time comes, to release with grace. Because love is not about holding on forever. It's about being fully present while we have it, and letting go with gratitude when we must. Story 3. The Farmer and the Horse. Once upon a time, in a quiet little village, there lived a humble farmer. He wasn't wealthy or well-known, but he was respected by everyone for his calm spirit and contented heart. He lived simply, tending his land with patience and grace. His most valuable possession was a single horse, his only help in plowing the fields and transporting goods. The horse was not just a working animal. It was a quiet companion in his modest life. One morning, the farmer woke up and discovered that the stable door was wide open. The horse had vanished. Hearing the news, the villagers rushed to his home with sympathy. "What terrible luck," they said. "How will you manage now without your horse?" The farmer smiled gently and replied, "Maybe so." The neighbors were puzzled. Surely this was misfortune. Yet the farmer showed no anger, no sadness. A few days later, to everyone's surprise, the horse returned. But it didn't come back alone. It brought with it a small herd of wild horses from the nearby mountains. Once again, the villagers came running. "How wonderful!" they exclaimed. "Now you have not just one but many horses. What incredible luck!" The farmer simply nodded and said, "Maybe so." Now the villagers were even more confused. How could he be so indifferent to such good fortune? Not long after, the farmer's son tried to tame one of the wild horses, but the horse threw him off violently, and the boy broke his leg. The injury was serious. He would be unable to walk or work for a long time. The villagers returned, once again shaking their heads. "What a shame," they said. "Such bad luck, your son is hurt, and now he can't help you with the farm." The farmer looked at them with the same calmness and answered, "Maybe so." Weeks later, war broke out. The government sent soldiers to every village, drafting all the able-bodied young men to fight in the army. Many sons from the village were taken away, but the farmer's son with his broken leg was left behind. The villagers, now emotional, came again to the farmer. "You are so fortunate," they said. "Your son was spared from the war. What a blessing." And once again, the farmer replied, "Maybe so." This story may sound simple, but it contains profound wisdom about impermanence and the danger of rushing to judgment. We humans love to label every event. This is good. That is bad. This is lucky. That is unfortunate. But the truth is, we rarely see the whole picture. What looks like tragedy today might lead to unexpected blessings tomorrow. What feels like success today might open the door to unseen challenges later. The farmer's quiet response, "Maybe so," was not apathy. It was clarity. It was the wisdom of someone who understands that life is always changing and that labeling every moment is often premature. He didn't let his emotions rise and fall with every twist of fate. He stayed rooted in the present. He lived with openness, not attachment, and perhaps true peace begins when we too can smile at life and softly say, "Maybe so." Story 4. The Buddha and the Robe. Giving where it's needed most. One sunny afternoon during his travels to share the Dharma, the Buddha arrived at a quiet village. The villagers, upon hearing of his arrival, gathered eagerly to listen to his teachings. Among them was a wealthy merchant, well known for his success and generosity. Deeply moved by the Buddha's wisdom and compassion, he felt a strong desire to offer something meaningful in return. The next morning, the merchant returned to the Buddha, carrying a luxurious robe, finely woven from the softest silk, adorned with delicate embroidery, and rich in color and beauty. He bowed respectfully and said, "Lord Buddha, please accept this robe as a token of my deepest respect and gratitude." The Buddha smiled warmly and replied with calm kindness, "Thank you for your sincere offering. But the robe I'm wearing is still in good condition, and I have no need for another. One is enough." The merchant, feeling a bit embarrassed, said, "But Lord, I truly wish to give you the best that I have. Please don't reject my offering." The Buddha gently responded, "If you truly wish to do good, take this robe and offer it to someone in need, someone who has no proper clothing to protect themselves. That, my friend, would bring much greater merit and compassion into this world." This story isn't about the value of a robe, but about the true nature of giving. Giving for praise seeks someone important. Giving for recognition looks for a public stage. But giving with true compassion looks for the quiet corners of suffering, where help is needed most, even if no one is watching. The Buddha didn't reject the gift, he redirected its meaning. He reminded us that real generosity isn't about the grandness of what we give, but about the impact it has on those who truly need it. The merchant followed the Buddha's advice. He found a poor man shivering in the cold, dressed in tattered rags. With great care, he wrapped the robe around the man's shoulders, and in that simple act, the merchant felt a warmth in his own heart, a kind of peace and joy he had never felt before. When he returned to the Buddha, his eyes were soft with understanding. Sometimes what we give doesn't need to be expensive or grand. It just needs to reach the right place. A heart, a life, a sense of dignity. Story 5. The Monk and the Tigers. Long ago, there was a Zen monk who lived in a quiet monastery high in the mountains, surrounded by deep, serene forests. Every day, he would take mindful walks along the narrow trails, letting each step be a meditation and each breath a return to the present. Nature in its stillness was his greatest teacher. One early morning, with the sunlight just beginning to filter through the trees, the monk walked peacefully along a rocky path. Suddenly, a terrifying roar echoed from the forest. A tiger. The sound made his heart jolt. He turned and saw a massive tiger charging toward him, its eyes locked onto him, its muscles tensing with ferocious speed. Without thinking, the monk ran his robe, billowing behind him, feet barely touching the ground. He reached the edge of a cliff. Below him was a steep drop. With no other option, he grabbed a thick vine hanging from the cliff's edge and swung himself over. Now, dangling in midair, he looked down. Another tiger. This one was waiting below, pacing hungrily at the bottom. The monk was trapped. A tiger above, a tiger below. Nowhere to go. As he clung to the vine, suspended between danger and death, something unexpected caught his eye. Growing out of the cliffside was a tiny, wild strawberry plant, and on it, a single ripe red strawberry. In that moment, the monk stopped thinking. He stopped fearing. He stopped running, even if only in his mind. He reached out, plucked the strawberry, and placed it gently into his mouth. It was sweet, fresh, exquisite. For that fleeting moment, the world disappeared. There were no tigers, no fear, no cliff, only the taste of the strawberry and the peace that came with fully being there. This story is a vivid metaphor for how many of us live chased by regrets of the past, the tiger above, and haunted by fears of the future, the tiger below. We spend so much of our lives hanging in worry, never fully alive. But even in the most impossible of situations, the present still exists. There's always a strawberry. There's always something, however small, to savor. A breath, a smile, a sound, a moment of stillness. The monk didn't deny his danger, but he chose not to miss the moment. That is the heart of mindfulness, not about escaping pain, not about pretending everything is perfect, but about choosing to live here and now with full awareness. Sometimes the most meaningful thing we can do is eat the strawberry. Story 6. The Two Arrows. One peaceful morning in the forest, the Buddha sat in meditation beneath the shade of tall trees. Sunlight filtered softly through the leaves, and birdsong echoed like a gentle hymn of nature. The atmosphere was serene, filled with stillness and awareness. A disciple stepped forward, his eyes troubled with questions. "Master," he asked, "I don't understand why life brings us so much suffering. Even when I try to live well, pain always seems to find its way in. How can we ever find peace in the midst of such suffering?" The Buddha looked at him with deep compassion and began to tell a simple story. Imagine someone is struck by an arrow. That arrow causes pain real sharp and unavoidable. This is the first arrow, and it hurts. Anyone who's wounded will feel that pain. It's natural. The disciple nodded. But now the Buddha continued. Instead of simply tending to the wound, this person then shoots themselves with a second arrow. This one isn't physical. It's made of thoughts. Why me? Whose fault is this? What if I never heal? This second arrow causes even more suffering, and it is self-inflicted. The Buddha paused, then spoke softly. The first arrow is inevitable, but the second arrow is optional. The story of the two arrows teaches us a powerful distinction between pain and suffering. Pain is a natural part of being human. Illness, loss, rejection, failure, no one escapes it. But suffering often comes from how we respond to that pain with resistance, blame, fear, or resentment. For example, when your heart is broken, that is the first arrow. But if you then think, I'll never be loved again, I'm not good enough, I can't move on, those are second arrows. They deepen the wound, and they come from your own mind. Mindfulness is what helps us recognize the first arrow and stop ourselves before the second one is fired. It allows us to say, yes, this hurts, but I won't make it worse. I will breathe. I will heal. The difference between a person who suffers and a person who is at peace is not in how much pain they experience, but in whether they stop after the first arrow or keep shooting themselves. Story 7. The Buddha and the Angry Man. One day, while the Buddha was giving a Dharma talk beneath the Bodhi tree, a man approached with fury burning in his eyes. His face was red with rage, his footsteps heavy with resentment. He had heard about the Buddha's teachings, but instead of admiration, he felt envy and disdain. He believed the Buddha's influence had caused people to abandon their duties, including his own son, who had joined the monastic path. To him, the Buddha represented everything that was changing in a world he no longer understood. Without greeting or courtesy, the man walked straight up to the Buddha and began to insult him. You're a fraud, a manipulator. You speak empty words and deceive people into following you. You are not. But the Buddha remained still, calm, his face as serene as a quiet lake, untouched by wind. The man grew more furious. At this silence, he shouted louder, "What's the matter? Do you think you're better than me? Why don't you say anything? Are you too proud to respond?" On and on the man raged, but eventually exhausted from his own anger, his breath heavy, he paused and asked, "Why aren't you saying anything? Aren't you angry?" The Buddha looked at him gently and replied, "Let me ask you something. If someone offers you a gift, but you refuse to accept it, to whom does the gift belong?" The man, puzzled, thought for a moment and answered, "Well, it would still belong to the person who offered it." The Buddha smiled softly. "Exactly. In the same way, you offer me your anger and your insults, but I do not accept them. Therefore, they still belong to you." This story is a timeless reminder of the power of non-reactivity and inner freedom. When someone directs anger, blame, or hurtful words toward us, the instinct is to react, to defend, to argue, to fight back. But in doing so, we accept their suffering as our own. We take the poison into our hearts. The Buddha didn't deny the man's rage. He simply chose not to receive it, because anger, when held onto, doesn't destroy the one it's directed at. It consumes the one who carries it. It's like holding a burning coal, intending to throw it at someone else. But the longer you hold it, the more it burns your own hand. By not accepting the negativity others bring, we protect our own peace. We create a space of stillness that may even help the other person see how unnecessary their anger is. Silence, when grounded in mindfulness, is not weakness. It is the greatest strength. Story 8. The Monk and the Teacup. High in the mountains, tucked away in a quiet monastery, surrounded by clouds and trees, lived a wise old monk. His life was simple, rooted in mindfulness. Each day, he would sit with his students, meditate, drink tea, and share the quiet wisdom of impermanence and presence. One peaceful afternoon, during their tea ceremony, the monk held up a simple clay teacup. It was plain, unadorned, but beautifully shaped and perfectly balanced. He stared at the teacup in silence for a long moment. The students watched curiously, wondering what lesson was about to unfold. Finally, the monk smiled gently and said, "This teacup is already broken." The students were confused. One of them spoke up, "But Master, the teacup isn't broken. It's right there, perfectly intact." The monk placed the cup softly on the table and said, "In my mind, it is already broken. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but one day it will fall, crack, or simply wear away. That is the nature of all things. When we truly accept that something will one day be gone, we stop clinging and start appreciating. If I know the teacup is already broken, I will cherish every time I pour tea into it. I won't be afraid. I will simply enjoy it while it is still here. And so it is with life. The people we love, the moments we treasure, the beauty that surrounds us. All of it is destined to change, to fade, to end. But that doesn't make life sad. It makes it precious. When we live with the understanding that everything is already broken, we don't become bitter. We become more present. We love without trying to possess. We enjoy without fearing the end. We hold gently, knowing we'll one day have to let go. Because impermanence isn't a curse. It's what makes every breath sacred, every smile a miracle, and every teacup worth holding as if it's the last. Story 9. The Buddha tames the angry elephant. Nagiri. During the Buddha's lifetime, he often walked from town to town, spreading the Dharma and offering wisdom to those who sought peace. As his influence grew, not everyone welcomed it. Among those who harbored jealousy was Devadatta, the Buddha's cousin and former disciple, who later became consumed by envy and ambition. Determined to harm the Buddha, Devadatta devised a cruel plan. He would unleash a wild elephant named Nagiri, known for its uncontrollable rage, to attack and kill the Buddha in public. One day, as the Buddha peacefully walked through the streets of Rajagaha, a large crowd had gathered to listen to his teachings. In secret, Devadatta ordered the release of Nagiri. The enraged elephant stormed through the city, trumpeting wildly. People screamed in terror and scattered in all directions. Some monks begged the Buddha, "Lord Buddha, please step aside. The elephant is coming straight at you." But the Buddha did not move. He kept walking slowly, steadily, with unshakable calm. His breath remained even. His gaze was soft. As the elephant charged, the Buddha lifted his hand, not in fear, but in a silent gesture of boundless compassion. He didn't see an enemy. He saw a suffering being consumed by fear and manipulation. As Nagiri drew closer, something remarkable happened. The wild rage in the elephant's eyes began to soften. Step by step, its charge slowed and then stopped. In the presence of the Buddha's serene energy, pure, loving, unwavering, the beast knelt down. It lowered its head and rested. Witnesses stood in awe. What force could calm such violence? No chains, no weapons, only loving kindness. This is not merely a story about taming an elephant. It is a symbol of taming anger, aggression, and the storms within. The Buddha did not resist hatred with hatred. He did not respond to violence with fear. He simply met it with compassion. We all face our own raging elephants in life. People who lash out in pain, moments of injustice, or even the wild anger inside our own hearts. And each time we have a choice to react in kind or to respond with a peaceful heart. Sometimes what softens the fiercest force isn't control, but compassion, not retaliation, but presence. Story 10. The Parable of the Raft. One quiet afternoon, the Buddha sat beneath the shade of a tree, teaching his disciples about something essential: how to understand the Dharma properly, not just as teachings to follow, but as tools to be used wisely without attachment. He shared a simple story. Imagine a man finds himself standing at the edge of a dangerous riverbank. Behind him is a wild, unsafe land filled with beasts, darkness, and fear. On the other side of the river lies peace, safety, and freedom. But there is no bridge, no boat. So, the man gathers branches, leaves, and vines, and carefully constructs a raft. With great effort, he paddles across the rough river and finally reaches the opposite shore, calm and safe. Now, he stands before a choice. Should he pick up the raft and carry it on his back for the rest of his journey? Or should he leave it behind, knowing it has served its purpose? After finishing the story, the Buddha turned to his disciples and asked, "What do you think he should do?" They answered, "He should leave the raft. It helped him cross, but he no longer needs it." The Buddha nodded and said, "Exactly. My teachings, the Dharma, are like that raft. They are meant to help you cross from ignorance and suffering to freedom and peace. But once you've crossed over, don't cling to them. Don't carry the teachings like a bird. Don't mistake the raft for the shore." This story reminds us that the teachings are not dogma to worship. The path is not a rigid mold to force upon others. All tools, whether teachings, rituals, or even teachers, are meant to lead us toward liberation, not become attachments themselves. Ironically, when we cling even to the path, we risk becoming bound by what was meant to set us free. Letting go of the raft doesn't mean abandoning the Dharma. It means understanding that true freedom comes not from holding tightly, but from moving lightly, with awareness, with compassion. These stories are not just to hear, but to live with 10 simple stories, and yet each one holds a lantern. Some speak of anger, others of loss. Some make us smile with their simplicity, while others quiet the heart with their honesty. And when we finally sit with ourselves, after all the noise, all the striving, we begin to understand these stories are not meant to be remembered. They're meant to be lived. When someone treats you unfairly, remember the empty boat. When fear and helplessness surround you, recall the strawberry between the tigers. When pain arrives, be mindful of the second arrow and your power not to fire it. When you're grieving a loss, remember Kisa Gotami's search for a house untouched by death. And when you feel you've found the path, don't forget the raft. It brought you across, but it's not meant to be carried. The Dharma is not just philosophy. Compassion is not just sweet words. And mindfulness is not only about sitting still with closed eyes. Mindfulness is taking a breath before reacting. Compassion is choosing not to receive someone's anger. And the Dharma is knowing when to let go, even of something that once saved you. If you take these stories and tuck them away, they will remain just stories. But if you walk with them in your steps, your silence, your presence, they will become light, not a blinding light, but one that is gentle, steady, and deeply peaceful. Thank you for listening and for being here with Mindful Healing. May you always find your peace not in the outside world, but within the quiet awakening of your own heart.